guys going to do to restore faith and confidence in the voters, at least out that way, that you all are doing the right thing with the money?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There was no budget for this migrant crisis that was voted on and passed by the previous city council.
It's Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson being asked, where's the accountability for the spending on the ongoing migrant crisis in Chicago? And, well, a lot said yesterday at a news conference about the Brighton Park facility that was supposed to be a migrant base camp tent, how much is being spent on all of that, but also the questions of what's next, and how's the city going to be continuing to respond to this, and how's the state going to be responding to this, especially when so many tax dollars are involved and the humanitarian questions around tens of thousands of migrants still flooding over the U.S. southern border. Bishop on Air back at it. You can follow along on social media channels like X, on Facebook, here on YouTube. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Greatly appreciate everybody chiming in and all the feedback I get regularly for continued programming here. But let's talk about the migrant crisis, because you've got the southern border where like 2 million people came over in 1 year, which was 500,000 more than the year before that, which was like 500,000 more than the year before that, and those are just the known interactions that have been had. What about those who've crossed over the southern U.S. border without really clearly some indication as to who they are, where they're from, because those gotaways, so to speak, that's an unknown. That's a known unknown, as Donald Rumsfeld might categorize it. So you've got millions of people who've crossed over, some seeking asylum, others maybe not, but regardless, southern border communities have been stretched thin, and they can't have the resources to take care of them in spaces that they have available. So they've been putting them on buses and sending them to places that are considered sanctuary states and cities, Chicago and Illinois being one of those. And a lot of money's gone into this. Governor J.B. Pritzker even acknowledging that it's been more than $500 million the state has spent on this issue and the ongoing costs for healthcare, food, housing, and so on. The governor was asked about this earlier this week, I believe yesterday. He delved into the spending and the controversy over the Brighton Park migrant base camp tent that was going to cost $30 million, but instead they decided they can't build it even after spending $1 million on it because of environmental concerns. But here's Governor Pritzker yesterday being asked about the spending and the contract with Garda World and how all this is falling into place and how they're going to continue handling this crisis, at least from the state's perspective here.
So from the state, the understanding with Garda World is that they will do other work with us, and they knew as they were building this shelter before the environmental report came in that it was possible that the environmental report wouldn't allow the completion of the shelter. And so they understood that, and they were willing to take that liability on through the state's contract. I can't speak to what may have pre-existed or been in place with the city. Meanwhile, they are going to be involved and have been in work to help us stand up other shelters. Remember, even the bricks and mortar shelters that already exist need work, and Garda World is helping us to complete that work very quickly so we can get people sheltered in the right places. We have not provided funding directly to the city, but we have spent, as you know, more than $500 million already to support the asylum seekers that have come to Illinois. That's on top of what the city has done. And our work has been wraparound services, making sure that we've got everything from healthcare, and food and other things, the services that people need until they can get a work permit. So I can't speak to the amount, but we don't transfer funds, at least with regard to asylum seekers, to the city. So that may be a cost that the city bears. Having said that, we're all working together. There's a lot of cost associated with this. We've tried to get the federal government to step up and do what they should be doing, but we haven't seen enough support from them yet.
So the governor essentially indicating there that he wants the federal government to step up with what? More spending? When he says what they should be doing, others would say what they should be doing is closing the border and actually enforcing the border and maybe going back to Trump-era policies of remain in Mexico. So we don't have people coming here claiming asylum, and those not being legitimate claims only to be found out months later when they actually do attend an asylum hearing. Because when they cross the border and they say, hey, I seek asylum, then they're giving a hearing date that's months and months and months down the road, and then they find themselves in a shelter or a police station floor in Chicago, as has been the case over the past 15, 16 months with more than 24,000 migrants that have come through. Now, the city has moved a lot of these migrants out of police station lobbies, out of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. They've set up different types of hotel operations, and as we'll hear from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, he says that he's looking for anywhere else outside of Chicago throughout the entire state of Illinois to send migrants. So in a way, as we'll hear from the mayor, he seems to be having to do what the southern border communities are doing. Can't handle it. It's draining a ton of resources. They don't have the space, so they're shipping them to other places. And now Brandon Johnson is looking to do the same thing from Chicago to other parts of Illinois. But here's the Chicago mayor yesterday taking a ton of questions about the spending and what the plan is here for the city of Chicago when it comes to dealing with the ongoing migrant crisis. Just some of the Q&A and the response, especially when it comes to the transparency of that spending.
On the spending, what are you guys going to do to restore faith and confidence in the voters, at least out that way, that you all are doing the right thing with the money?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There was no budget for this migrant crisis that was voted on and passed by the previous city council. So not only did I inherit an international crisis, there was no budget. There was very little infrastructure. And within almost 7 months now that I've been in office, we've literally had to create a budget, establish some structure and order, advocate at the federal level around international policies, while also making sure that we're building an operation that centers people's humanity. Now, I can't speak for the previous city council. What I can say, though, is that this budget provides a real structure and frame around what our capabilities are. And again, my job is to level set, address what I inherited, and build off the progress that we have established thus far. Look, this international crisis clearly is not going anywhere anytime soon. The people of Chicago voted for me to provide structure, to create some discipline and some accountability to not just this mission, but all of our work. And I've done just that.
So, again, the mayor is saying it's not going away anytime soon. So we're going to see continued thousands of people cross the border each day. If not, as has been reported recently, 10,000 a day. Still kind of back to record levels and where they're going to end up. Not just in Chicago, as we'll hear, the mayor says that he's looking for places outside of Chicago across the state of Illinois to house these migrants. But he continued to take questions about the ongoing crisis and the ongoing spending.
Well, again, the mission, of course, here is the mission to house migrants. This international crisis with global population shift all over the world, that we're standing up as many shelters as we possibly can. You know, as far as these contracts are concerned, I mean, these are ongoing dynamics that, you know, continue to require us to move with some expediency. You know, as far as the specifics in the contract, just like any business that we do in the city of Chicago, you know, these contracts are meant to not only serve a purpose, but if there are some specific elements and dynamics that you wish to see, you know, I'm happy to make sure that our team gets back with you. Thank you.
So again, a lot of the questions were about transparency, and you know, the media in Chicago have FOIA'd for a variety of different documents about the spending, but they're not getting all the answers that they're seeking. So, you know, the mayor just kind of saying, "Hey, we'll get you what we can." more from the mayor, especially about the Brighton Park debacle, because there were questions for years about that area not being used for anything because of contamination of the soil. But apparently the city moved forward with plans and even spent what appears to be $1 million on the Brighton Park facility.
And what we found was that the city spent just under $1 million, $985,000. And what I'm wondering is, since it's been said that the state would be absorbing most of the cost, what are the costs for this site that the city was responsible for, and what are the costs for the other shelters that you are also having to renovate that the city is responsible for?
Well, look, we said from the very beginning that my commitment was to assess not just this site, but multiple sites. Because again, this international crisis has already been alluded to, the influx of migrants. I don't believe that's going to slow down, just as long as we have the type of failures and the political interests that are not aligned with the true values of our country work to prevail. And so we made this commitment to assess this site and multiple sites. As far as, what else we're responsible for, our team is in conversations, particularly with this site, with the owner, as we move forward, because clearly, at least at this moment, that site, we're not moving forward with it.
I guess the question is, where did those $1 million go? What was the city was paying?
Remediation, yeah, the remediation that was needed. Obviously, the workforce, all of that. The contracts to remediate, and again, the workforce.
So the $1 million going to remediate soil and to those workers who are doing all of that for a site that's just not going to be used, apparently. But then you had a question come in about how the spending in other migrant shelters seems to be exorbitant, and even a question from a WBEZ reporter about how documentation still indicates that only 18% of people working at these migrant shelters are city residents, only 18%, and they're getting millions and millions of dollars here. And even the question of how much these workers who aren't Chicago residents are getting paid. And tail end of the question for the mayor, who responds.
Up to $2,100 a day per employee to this multinational corporation owned by a Canadian billionaire.
So could you restate your question again? I heard the editorial at the very end. What's your question?
When can we have updates on vendors, like more local vendors?
Oh, yeah, I got you. So there are some RFPs that are still being finalized. And as I said from the very beginning, again, I can't speak for what was done prior to when I arrived, but I've been very upfront about challenging our department to renegotiate these contracts, but also make sure that we are prioritizing Chicagoans. I'm still very much committed to that, and we'll get you an update soon, okay?
So again, costing a lot, and apparently some of the contracts that have been reviewed by Chicago area media indicating that you've got corporations owned by a Canadian billionaire that is getting paid substantial amounts of money to pay non-Chicago residents upwards to $2,100 a day to work in these facilities. But then the mayor was also asked about the ongoing flow of migrants and how he continues to handle that. While they move migrants out of city police stations and out of O'Hare International Airport, there's 10,000 crossing the southern border a day, apparently, and those are going to be sent to sanctuary cities like Chicago. Is the mayor confident they're going to be able to handle that continued influx?
Now, as I continue to do, we have stood up shelters. I think we're up to 26, almost 30 shelters. We continue to look across not just the city of Chicago, but my team has looked across the entire state of Illinois. I don't know if there's any other administration that is working as hard as the people in this administration. I mean, literally searching for property all over the state of Illinois, because this is a crisis. As I've said, it's not going to go away because people are upset. Now, unfortunately, you have individuals that have used this as a way to execute its meanness.
Here's where I want to take just a moment to dissect what he said here. He is reacting to southern border communities sending migrants to sanctuary cities, saying that there's meanness. If you recall, weeks ago, he used a whole bunch of other terms, including MAGA, Republicans, the right wing, and equating them to people who don't think Barack Obama was an American, and so on. You remember those comments a few weeks ago. He seems to soften that down a bit, but he also seems to not realize that he's looking to do exactly what they're doing, right? They're sending people because of lack of resources they have locally. They're sending migrants to sanctuary cities that said, hey, we're sanctuary cities for migration. We're not going to enforce immigration law here, so come on in. We have tons of programs and free health care and so on. So, the southern border communities are like, hey, we'll just send them to the sanctuary cities. And then what Johnson is doing, what he said there just a moment ago, is that he's looking to move the migrants from Chicago to other places throughout Illinois. And then he reflects on that and tries to paint those in the southern, district communities that are doing what he's looking to do, saying that they're doing it as a mean spirit. More from the mayor.
I don't know if there's any other administration that is working as hard as the people in this administration. I mean, literally searching for property all over the state of Illinois, because this is a crisis. As I've said, it's not going to go away because people are upset. Now, unfortunately, you have individuals that have used this as a way to execute its meanness. And it's caused the type of strife.
Don't know why the lights went down there, but the lights came back up.
That type of meanness has caused the type of strife that we are experiencing now. Now, clearly, as difficult as this moment has been, our coalition is still remaining strong. And, people have so much to say about the city of Chicago, especially those who don't live here. They should stop talking, because it is this city that has come up with some structure and order of how buses arrive.
So he says that those that don't live in the city should not talk about the city, but at the same time, he also said that he's looking to move the migrants out of the city to other places in Illinois. So should those places outside of Illinois, I mean, I've seen other headlines from the various communities and suburbs of Chicago saying that migrants can't stay in their hotels, and they're fining buses for dropping off homeless migrants. And even we'll hear from the mayor of the city yesterday, they did pass a Chicago ordinance that would allow for them to fine buses as well. But I mean, is that not mean-spirited? Again, he's telling people that don't live in Chicago to not talk about Chicago, while saying that he's going to move migrants out of Chicago to other communities throughout the state of Illinois where people live that don't live in the city of Chicago, regardless. More from the mayor.
It's this city that continues to hold to its values. It's this city that continues to invest in neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in. The fact that we have a real commitment for restoration and reparations, a real commitment to make sure that we are investing in those who have been formerly incarcerated. Like, our work hasn't stopped because of this crisis. And so our team remains committed to having the type of nimbleness that I believe that you are alluding to, and the flexibility to be able to respond to this crisis. And as I've also said, the federal government, the state government, county government, city, we all have to do more. And that's the challenge that we all have. And in the midst of us doing more, we cannot forget about the families who also need us to do more. And we're up for the challenge.
There's no question the humanitarian issue here, and the exorbitant cost as well. Because, listen, while he says don't talk about Chicago if you don't live here, well, then could people say don't ask for federal tax dollars because the people who are paying those federal tax dollars don't live in Chicago? Don't ask for state tax dollars because the people living in central Illinois don't live in Chicago. So, how do you manage that when you've got that type of rhetoric of, some people commenting, keep my city's name out your mouth, that type of mentality? Is that the way to foster cooperation in all of this and to retrain the focus on the humanitarian crisis? And why is it they're only asking for more money? Even Governor Pritzker seeming to say the federal government needs to do more in terms of more tax dollars. Why not close the southern border? Regardless, Mayor Johnson also reacting to questions about a new ordinance the city of Chicago passed dealing with how they treat buses that are dropping people off from the southern U.S. border after they crossed, either seeking asylum or illegally.
Can you talk about some of the specifics that would lead to a bus actually being impounded, to the criteria that would go into that, and do you expect that to be enforced starting immediately?
Well, it was passed today mainly because, we have a real irresponsible, inhumane practice that's coming from the border. And what I've said from the very beginning, we have to create some structure and order and some calm to this crisis, and my leadership has done just that. Decompressing our police districts, only one left, while also maintaining, of course, the expectation of the people of Chicago, that we're actually serving those who are protected by international law, that are seeking asylum here. Now, what the ordinance is very clear about is that there's a 48-hour notification that has to be provided. There are very clear times in which buses can drop asylum seekers off in the city of Chicago, and there's a specific location. This is not, an unusual dynamic. This is a type of order and structure that my leadership is providing, and we'll continue to do just that.
And just to follow up, Block Club and others have.
You've got the mayor continuing to take questions about this, and we'll obviously hear more because the humanitarian crisis is evident, the taxpayer costs grows, and the border continues to remain open. So we'll hear more of it. It's Bishop on Air. Check in each and every weekday morning about this time. Get the latest of what's going on with a variety of issues. Appreciate you guys taking your part of your morning to hang out.